Welcome to this. It's the third of a series of presentations on how to build up your soil. I want to send out a little blanket of protection for anybody who's out there affected by the fires that are surrounding us, and also welcome you all to be inside for an hour where you're not breathing smoke. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to do this. We're still on new technology here. It is another computer, so bear with me just a second. So why am I doing this presentation on cover crops? My soil is dry, it's hard, it's filled with weeds, not all of it, but a lot of it is. And I wanted to have something lusher and more healthy looking. So I started looking into it. Now you might think that that doesn't sound like a great expert for someone who's coming in with questions of their own about cover crops. So I got myself a consultant. So I have run this by Lee out here, a professor for the Center of Agriculture at CSUC and part of the Regenerative Ag Consort. And that gave me, and possibly you, a little more confidence. So one of the ways I started learning about this is through this book. So can you guys see that?
Backwards?
Can they see it backwards?
It's dirt to soil. If you see it backwards.
It's dirt to soil. Do you see that backwards? Anyway, dirt to soil is one family's journey into regenerative ag. This is the story of Gabe Brown, who didn't start out from a farming family, but he was fascinated by it from teen years, worked on farms, and then he married a farmer's daughter. I thought that he was going to be inheriting the family farm, but it turned out that it was split 3 ways, and he came into a much smaller part of land. This had been a property that was tilled. It had been traditionally farmed for many, many, many years with herbicides as needed, pesticides, and synthetic fertilizers, the affordable synthetic fertilizers. Well, fertilizers are no longer quite so affordable, and Gabe Brown came upon the idea from a fellow farmer of doing no-till gardening. So he was a scientific sort of fellow, so he started charting things about the carbon in his soil and other things that were going on. And when he started wait a minute, do I have this? Do I have a pointer? No. No. I don't have a pointer on here. Okay. Sorry guys, different computer, different scope. So you'll see on the side of the screen it says no-till. In 1993, he started using no-till for his smaller farm, not small. Then you'll see that there is a little rise in the, yeah, there it is. Okay, so his carbon in his soil started rising. If you remember from the previous talks, if you were with us, carbon is, and nitrogen, nutrients, and so on, and water holding capacity, they kind of go hand in hand. So his soil is getting a little bit better under the no-till treatment. Then he heard about crop diversity. He started putting in vetch with his turnips, things like that. And I have to tell you that when he started farming his own plot, he had a serendipitous but seemingly tragic event. For the first year, hail knocked out his crop. The second year, hail knocked out his crop. The third year, he was also diversifying with cows, and he lost most of his calves to a blizzard and much of his crop. He was able to reseed because the blizzard was early enough. But the next year, there was a drought where there was only like maybe 1% rain. This is a very hard way to start farming. And he likes to say that his banker actually knew when he needed to buy toilet paper. So one of the things that happened with this, he didn't have any money for fertilizer. He didn't have any money for pesticides, herbicides. He even sold his tractor in order to buy the equipment to do the no-till gardening, which involves a little bit different kind of way of seeding. So he was now without any kind of intrusions on the land, not by his first choice, but because of circumstances. He, in the initial phases, and this is true when you're converting to this three-pronged approach to changing a way of building soil, he had a little bit of a rise, but not a real substantial rise until he hit this place right here is where he stopped using synthetic fertilizers, and you start seeing a rise after that point. Before that, it's kind of level. After that, carbon in the soil starts to grow. Right here is where he decided to start using multiple species of cover crops. He experimented with this by setting out different plots. You'd have like 8 different plots and tried various kind of combinations, and he decided that the multiple species cover crops were giving him the best yields, the best biomass, the healthiest crops. And so he started with like maybe 6 or 8 or something, and now he's he and a fellow farmer like to come up with wacky things to do in their farms. So he decided to plant a chaos garden where he had 30 acres of 20 different kind of species of plants, cover crops, vegetables, legumes, all that. It was kind of a big bio mess, but in a year of 1-inch rainfall, it was a vibrant, green, productive area on the farm because it had given such protection to the soil. Now, the other thing he did was he added livestock in the mix. We're going to leave this one out unless you have a really, really big yard and your backyard, you want to add a couple of cows. It's not going to be the subject of this talk, but there are many farmers who have added a rotation of livestock to make their soil more productive. There are 3 principles to building up healthy soil and getting healthy plants. Excuse me. Repeat of last week, you guys. The first one is minimize disturbance. You're going to focus on growing microbes. And this is really 1-slide recap of the first week's presentation. And I'll have a 1-slide recap of the second week, and then we'll move into diversity. So you're focusing on growing microbes, not plants. Stop killings, the digging dices, and pulverize the microbes. Stop the herbicides and pesticides. They disrupt the soil food web. The fertilizers have a negative impact on the microbes. The plants don't need, when they have a surfeit of fertilizer, of nitrogen around them, to produce the sugars that will draw the bacteria and fungi and other kinds of soil critters to them. And it's the other things in the soil, the bacteria and the mycorrhizae and so on, that are bringing the micronutrients, the elements and trace minerals to the plant. This is also making the plant a more nutrient-dense food when it comes to consuming it. Without this, there are relatively empty calories to your food. The second week, we talked about no-bare soil. A healthy soil will grow healthy plants. That means they're more disease resistant, they're more drought resistant, and they're more insect resistant. So how do we get that? Is we feed the soil with compost. We talked about various kinds of compost, some being more fungal dominant than others. And the reason this is important is because Dr. David Johnson found that as you approach a 1-to-1 fungal to bacterial ratio, you get much better growth and vibrancy in the plants that you are growing. So there are ways to get a more fungal dominant compost. Our home compost piles and the land, generally farmed land that's been traditionally farmed, is more bacterial dominant. So switching to a more fungal dominant is one way that you foster this ability to grow soil. So the next thing is you need to keep the soil covered. Cover it with mulch of various kinds of mulches will work. The reason this is important, remember, is about this fungi. Well, what do fungi like? They like it to be cooler. They like it to be moister than a lot of other things. And this mulch is going to keep the microbes or the fungi in the soil happier and more productive. So they can help sequester the carbon, increase water retention, and bring in all these elements and trace minerals. So a healthy soil is going to give you a more nutrient-dense food. So principle number 3 is the subject of it for today, and that's diversity. Boy, oh boy, I did not know what to do with cover cropping. And so I started looking into it, and I wanted to pass the information on to you in case you also are confused. So Johnson's research, why would you do cover cropping? So Johnson's research, there was a clear demonstration with the value of multi-species cover crops. This is like the early years of his land when he was doing his application of fungal-rich compost on all these fields. But in the first year he was getting, then this is a multi-species cover crop. This is the first year, and this is the 5th year, I think. And you can see this plant right here is a kind of grass that usually grows 4 to 5 feet high. It's at 12 feet. The biomass, when doing multi-species cover crops, he had 8 species in this mix, and it nearly doubled the biomass he had annually. So how do you select a mix? Well, this was a puzzler to me also. The first thing you do is with all plants, to check out your zone and find out what's going to live here happily. The next one is check out your season. Are you planting in the warm season or the cool season? Right now, we're going into the cool season, so it's time to plant cool season cover crops. You need to take a look at what is your ability to water it. Are you going to just rely on rainfall, in which case you're going to need a dry cover crop? Or do you have an irrigated area where you can supply them with whatever water they need? That'll widen your choices for the cover crop. And the next one is, why are you growing the cover crop? What's your purpose? What does your soil need? The things that cover crops can help you with is they can break up heavy soil. For example, the deep roots of a daikon radish go very low into the soil, and when it breaks down, it releases nutrients into the soil. Grains have huge long roots to them. Another thing is, are you trying to add nutrition to the soil? Nitrogen fixers, and bring in, like the legumes are great for fixing nitrogen. Organic matter. Grasses have huge amounts of biomass. Remember the 12-foot high plant? Lots of biomass. So grasses and grains will contribute a lot as they break down on the soil to give you carbon to take into your land. They're great. Some of them are great for weed suppression. Another use for cover crops would be erosion control. If you have a steep bank or a sides of a creek or something, you want to control the erosion, the root masses of cover crops will help you do this. Some uptake toxins. There's a particular radish that they used after the Chernobyl incident. I don't remember what that year was. It was a while back. But a nuclear reactor went off and polluted the area. And they actually found some radishes and other plants that they were using as a cover crop to uptake the toxins, the radioactive toxins. They had like 4,000 times the amount that was in the soil when they were harvested this, so they can take up the toxins and make them easier to get rid of. Also, you may remember Paul Stamets. He's a mushroom guy. So he's done a tremendous amount of work with using fungi and mushrooms to clean up sites. They actually use this to great advantage in some of the oil spills. Another use of cover crops are to bring in pollinators and beneficials. So these are your flowering plants, largely your broadleaf plants that will be food for the bees and foster beneficial insects for your garden. Pest management is another use. If you've got diseases or too many of some kind of bug, so the mustards and the radishes will help you with this. And here's the place where we're not going to talk too much about this because you don't have the cow in the backyard, I'm assuming. So, but cover crops can be used for forage. So cover crops fall into three major categories, and then there's some that don't fall into those categories so well, but they're grasses and grains, legumes, and broadleaves. Grasses and grains have really big root structures often and lots of biomass. Legumes fix nitrogen and bring in other nutrients. And the broadleaves bring in the pollinators and beneficials. Of course, there's a lot of crossover between these plants. It's not all mutually exclusive. On each of these, there are warm and cool season versions. The USDA came up with a great chart to help you figure out what to do about which cover crops would be useful under what conditions. This is a chart that has a lot going on in it, and let me just show you some of the things. There's a growth cycle. If you notice here, there's like A and there's some peas down here. White clover is a perennial. Other kinds of clovers are annuals. Chickpeas an annual. So this is a growth cycle that's useful, especially if you have a garden, you want to grow a cover crop, but you don't want the cover crop to take over when it's time for you to plant something else. You can choose an annual that's going to be knocked off by frost, and you won't even have to cut it down. The cool temperatures will knock it down for you, and you leave it on the soil and go ahead and plant into it. So knowing whether it's an annual and it's going to terminate its life cycle, or whether it's a perennial and you're depending on it to bring up the nutrients and so on for multiple seasons, this is a chart that will let you choose that. The other thing is the plant architecture. You like plants in the garden when you have a shrub and a ground cover and some blooming broadleaf things. You can do the same thing with your cover crops. So choose something that's upright and also some spreading plants, some prostrate plants, or you could have an application where you want to only have things that are very low growing. For example, if you're wanting to seed a cover crop in an orchard and you want something as a nutrient bringing ground cover under your fruit trees, choose something that's prostrate, low growing, so that you can do the work of harvesting and taking care of the trees. The other thing is a relative water use. Like all garden areas, you want to choose things that have similar water needs in a given area. So if you're without irrigation and don't expect much rainfall, which can happen, you want to get the low water use plants. With an irrigation, you have more latitude to choose. The next thing is we talked about their cool season plants. There's the ones in the cool season, and there are warm season plants. These are the ones that we're going to focus on for right now. These are your options. And here are the categories that we mentioned. These are grasses. These are broad-leafed plants. These are your legumes, nitrogen fixers, and here are your warm season grasses. So, but you already have a garden, I'm thinking. So how are you going to integrate a cover crop into your home garden? So a lot of these stories that I'm reading about are guys that are farmers. I mean, they don't have to incorporate their cover crop into their perennial bed or their little tiny vegetable garden. So how do we do it? One way is by interseeding or intercropping. This is just planting among the things that you already have. About 1/3 into the vegetable season, whatever the vegetable is, say it's your, I don't know, yellow squash or something, about 1/3 of the way into the season for that plant, begin to sow a cover crop. One example is if you have a bed of lettuce and onion, you can sow in yellow blossom sweet clover. Another way to do it is to put living mulch between the rows so that you have, this is where you might want to choose one of those low growers. So living mulch between the rows can add nutrient to your soil. Remember, those fungi are traveling. They're not just staying like right around the roots. They can spread out for yards, or some of them spread out for miles. You can also add a pollinator strip so that you can bring in some of the beneficials, feed the bees. Another way to do it is succession planting. This means you're planting one thing when the other thing is done. For example, you have a crop of lettuce and radishes, and those are kind of petering out. You're about done with those. You may have seeded them to come along in another spot, but this particular bed is about done. Then as you harvest those, you can plant buckwheat. They'll probably have a long enough season so that this will be able to be knocked down or reach its maturity before it's time to plant fall vegetables. And always, whether cover crops or whether your vegetables or pretty much all the plants, they benefit from having a crop rotation so that diseases and insects don't take over. I'm not getting this to go over. There it goes. Okay. Okay, so farmer after farmer has come up. I can't believe the number of these farmers that are starting out with really, really crappy soil. There's a guy in Australia who's really very famous, really well known in the circuit of regenerative ag. He's a hero. He and his wife are heroes. It's Ian and Diane Haggerty. And he bought land that was basically sand. I mean, there wasn't anything going on there. So actually, most of the farmers I've read about came from traditionally farmed land or land that was just not going to grow things without a lot of inputs, supposedly. But we can fix this and come up with something more like this. So how do you go about planting the cover crop? First of all, get a mixture of seeds. Remember, multiple kinds of crops are what you're going to be planting. You want a mix of grasses and grains, legumes, and broadleafs. One of the really critical things in planting your cover crop, as in pretty much all seeds, is you need to have seed to soil contact. The way that you can get this is make a little tiny furrow. This isn't digging a deep trench. It's just scraping a little edge of the in the dirt, or the soil, as we call it. Maybe it's dirt, I don't know. So yeah, do a little full of furrow with your trowel or your rake. Drop the seed in and add compost tea. This is especially important if your soil is poor in nutrients. Traditionally, like the Gabe Brown, he would his machine would drop a little bit of some kind of fertilizing thing with his seeds initially, but this is a replacement for that. So when you're putting down your seeds, you drop in a little bit of compost tea, and it will give the plants what they need to get started. Cover it with compost or soil and water it. Check it daily to make sure that it's not drying out. When the plants are about 4 inches high, give it another dose of a foliar feed and you'll be off to a great start. Compost tea, this is a compost tea recipe. I'm not going to go through it, but I put it in the slides, and when this presentation is over, the PowerPoint will be available to you to look up. So this was another obstacle for me. I did grow some cover crops all early on, and I didn't really know when you were supposed to get rid of them. What are you supposed to do with them after they grew a little bit? Basically, when you're forming flowers and before it goes to seed, cut it down. Now, I actually thought, because I think about all kinds of ways to do things, so I don't really just take directions well. So I actually thought, well, what's the point of that? I'm supposed to be gathering up stuff on the land, and I have to go buy seeds. Why don't I just let it sit there, go to seed, knock itself down, and grow more stuff? So why would I go through all the work of knocking it down and then waiting for it to do something and buying more seed? So Lee Altier gave me the answer to this one. Basically, there's a time when these crops, grasses, greens, whatever, they're still kind of succulent. They have a lot of food in their tissue. If you let them go to seed, that food is not in the tissue, it goes into the seeds. So it's less nutrient rich for the soil. The other thing that happens is it becomes a lot more fibrous. It's much more difficult for it to be broken down by the little insects and soil critters and taken down to form that carbonaceous material. It takes a lot longer to do it if you let them go to seed and become fibrous before you knock them down. So when you see the flowers form and before the seeds come out, cut the cover crop down and leave it as mulch on the soil. So you can just let it sit there. If you want to plant into it right away, and there is an advantage to planting into it right away, there is one of the best carbon accumulating farms ever is what is it, Dancing Frog or Singing Frog Farm. So Singing Frog Farm is known for this huge accumulation in a very short time of carbon in the soil. And what he does is he knocks down the cover crop, immediately puts mulch on it, and immediately puts his transplants or seeds into that mulch. He probably doesn't even wait till the next morning. I don't know, maybe he waits till the next morning sometimes. Anyway, He has a very rapid transformation. He keeps those roots in the soil going. So the whole thing is to have live roots in the soil. And remember from last time we talked about that the fungi are feeding on the exudates of the roots. If you don't have live roots in the soil, the fungi don't have food. They can die off or go someplace else. So you want to keep roots in the soil, and the roots in the soil that you've cut off the plant, those become the channels, the highways for the microbes to run down to get to the new plants and the new roots, and also channels for water penetration and for nutrients to be brought up. So compost or compost, oh, there is the issue, and I'm sure some of you are thinking of it right now. So if you knock these things down and you're leaving them on the soil, you know that that's going to use some nutrients. It's going to use some nitrogen as it breaks down. It's not like it's only nitrogen deficit. The offset of that is using compost, once again, compost tea and compost to add food to the soil. Okay, this addresses my next question was, how am I supposed to decide with all of these, I don't know how many cover crops there are, 56 or something like that. How am I supposed to decide which one I should use for my garden? So I asked Lee out here what he would recommend for our area at this time. And these are some of the things that he came up with. A winter mix, which includes peas, fava beans, bell beans, vetch. These are the fava beans, peas, bell beans. Those are nitrogen fixers. Vetch has a really deep, deep root system. Lasts longer than these guys, than some of these other guys will. Oats will get knocked down with cold, but as a good biomass and root system one. Rye also. Flax and some clovers have flowers. They'll bring in pollinators. So those were Lee Altier's suggestion. Another suggestion was cool season mix. For a cool season mix was rye, hairy vetch, crimson clover, winter peas, purple top turnips, and daikon radish. Daikon radish, remember, that's got a really deep root. So if you have clay soil like I do, I'm going to plant some daikon radish. Purple top turnips bring protein and nutrients to the soil. Winter peas, nitrogen fixer, as is clover. And hairy vetch has a big root system, as does rye. Vetch has also flowers and kind of can look pretty. Okay, so say you've got a raised bed, you don't have a big garden and you don't want to do a whole huge cover croppy thing, you can still do some cover crops in your raised beds and have them become more abundantly rich in the microbes for your plants that you plant after these are done. Or you can plant them with your plant intercrop with these also. So you've got rye, hairy vetch, red clover, buckwheat. Lee out here said, unless we have a late winter, the buckwheat won't have enough time to get to the flower stage, but I'm kind of thinking it's going to be a late winter, so I'm going to plant some. Anyway, even if it didn't get to the flower stage, it's still going to have green stuff I can use, right? So anyway, this is another combination. This has Italian ryegrass, needs to be sown by October. Forage peas need to be sown by November. So once you have your diverse crop in the ground, it brings on another kind of diversity. This was the guy that it brought on for me, little gopher. And then after the gopher, I found this fellow, which probably, the gopher was eating one kale plant a day, routinely, one kale plant, one chard plant a day. until this fellow moved in, and he then stopped eating any kale plants. So I have talked about what you can plant, when you can plant it, how to choose. It does sound a little bit complicated to me still. So this is a slide about it doesn't have to be complicated. One of the farmers that had one of the big carbon accumulating farmers of regenerative ag fame, who has a farm around Santa Barbara, said that one of the reasons why people don't tell you, just plant this, here, I'm counting on my fingers, this, plant those and you'll be good. It's because your land is different than their land. Every situation is a little bit different and will take a different kind of combination of plants. If you plant enough of them, you're going to come up with something that'll work. So that's one of the things that having multiple species will do for you. If you want to start more gently, just include 1 or 2 companion plants with your vegetables. You can purchase, instead of going through, oh, I forgot to tell you about this. Oh, my little handout. Do you remember when we had this chart? Well, this chart is 1 page of this. And this lists for all of the cover crops of your particular region, it lists whether it's warm season, annual, its architecture, the water use, the salinity that it will tolerate, the depth to plant it, what kind of outcome you can expect in terms of carbon to nitrogen ratios, and whether it's going to draw fungi or, I can't say this, arbuscular mycorrhizal associations, and whether it needs a pollinator. So it's got pictures, and well, it's online. You can look it up. There's a source under USDA on the references and resources page. I wanted to point out to you also, and this is about complicated, but it doesn't have to be. If you like to research things and pick your own cover crop, you can get this. You can download a cover crop guide. This is also enlisted in your resources. And this one I like actually even better in terms of how it describes the cover crops. So it's got a paragraph that's about the beneficial nutrients, the pest management, erosion control, whatever that particular cover crop is good for doing. It's going to talk to you about that, and has growing tips for it and seeding rates. It's a really good overview of each of the cover crops on 1 page summary. So those are 2 resources that are available to you online. If you don't want to do the research and look up all that stuff, just go into one of the places that sells, just look, Google cover crop seeds, go into one of the places that has cover crop seeds and order a mix. You'll find they describe them often in terms that are recognizable to you, like there's the soil builder mix, there's the break up your heavy clay mix, there's the pollinator mixes, and so on. And just pick something that kind of resonates with you and your situation. So remember that you need to knock it down before it seeds and leave it, add compost, and plant into it as soon as possible. And you don't have to make it too difficult. Just basically seed, mulch, water, boom. Have a cover crop and your soil will love it. This, I had to put this one in because the concept is so fascinating. I just could not resist it. I thought it was a little bit of a stretch, but you know, when you know that supposedly people are 99.9% bacteria, fungi, microorganisms, nematodes, whatever. We're not very much people. We're mostly stuff, little critters. And if you took the human part of us out, we would still have this shadow of an existence that would have all these other microbes and tiny things that would be a presence. So one of the things is bacteria. Bacteria are fascinating, and there are just so many of them in here. So one of the things, for example, if you've got they're always there. Strep throat. Let's take strep throat. Strep throat is always around. It's in your throat right now. There's good strep and bad strep, but they're in there right now. So the reason that you don't have strep throat today is because you have enough beneficial bacteria and organisms going all over in there that it suppresses the strep throat. So Nicole Masters is one of these wonderful people who go around the world giving workshops on regenerative ag and nutrient-dense food. And if you get a chance to see her or look her up on YouTube, watch some of her videos. She is great and very entertaining, really informed. It's a treat to watch her. But she said, it isn't about whether or not you have a disease, it's about whether or not you have the beneficials to suppress it. Well, this is the same true with people and plants. It's not whether you are contracting something that's wrong with you. It's about, do you have enough microbiota going on so that it doesn't manifest itself? And when it does manifest itself, it's probably because of something called quorum sensing. This is a way that bacteria communicate with each other by chemical signals and enzymes and maybe electrical signals. We've got a whole bunch of ways that they communicate with each other. And when they're trucking along, just living all together, kind of controlled by the other guys, and then something changes and the environment is conducive to them replicating, reproducing. And they do this and send out the signals and gather themselves up. And then at some point, there is a critical mass. It's like a sudden different thing that happens, a critical mass where they manifest this disease or for example, in our example above, with the strep throat, all of a sudden you go along, you don't have a sore throat, you're fine, you're doing okay, boom, you have a sore throat. That's because the quorum sensing has reached that critical mass. The strep throat bacteria have reached a critical mass where they manifest strep throat. So one of the things that I extrapolated from this is that in some way, all of us today, have become a part of the quorum that is here to protect the Earth's surface. Now, I hope you don't take offense at this, but I just had to throw it in there because it kind of tickled me. One of the early pioneers of regenerative ag workshops and so on, I think his name's Ingram, and I've got to look it up. I can't remember her first name, something like Eileen or something. Anyway, sorry about that, I'll look it up. The biggest barrier to agricultural programs is behind the ears. So I kind of like the looks of this garden. It's tidy, it looks like it's going to be easy to take care of. It appeals to me aesthetically, and it's going to be a stretch for me to go to things that are more all over themselves. It's also a stretch for me to make compost tea instead of just throwing out some pellets. And it's a stretch. Fostering cover crops instead of planting my vegetables one after another in a crop rotation is a stretch for me. And so I'm going to urge you actually in order to help make this a thing, in order to get started on this, I would urge you to connect with other people who are also interested in doing it. Buddy up, talk about what the challenges are, what the successes are, share your cover crop order. I think that we can do this together. So there is so much information available in a very user-friendly way on the internet now. There's if you're interested in hearing more from David Johnson, he's very informative. He did a webinar for regenerating the diversity in the life of the soil. You can watch it on YouTube. As I mentioned, there's books. There are lots of books. This one, Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. Another one is Growing a Revolution by David Montgomery. And these, I was surprised. I didn't think reading about, growing microbes on dirt was going to be a particularly interesting topic when I bought the books. But the tales of these people they're stories. They're real life stories. They're quite gripping. I encourage you, especially if you're either if you're standing on the fence and you're not too sure you believe the stuff, or you want to dive in and want support and the rationale behind that, I urge you to do some reading and watch some of the videos. Dr. Christina Jones is another super well-known soil ecologist, travels all over the world giving workshops, and her website is amazingcarbon.com. There are lots of presentations on that you can watch. And there's the cover crop chart. I'm going to take a few questions, but just so that I don't forget, the coming attraction is companion planting, which kind of goes right along with plant diversity. And that's going to be next week by Joyce Hill. Do we have any questions?
And actually we do. That's a good time to take a small break here because we have some questions from Joyce that she's collected from our chat box. And
yeah, are you ready, Cheryl?
Yeah, can you give Cheryl a couple of those questions?
One of the questions had to do with how do we make compost more fungal dominant?
Oh, that's interesting that you should ask, because that's the question that I asked Lee Altier. How do you say that?
That's right.
Altier? Okay. So I asked him, I said, because I had this idea, I thought, that, I don't know if you remember I think it was last week, I talked about if you needed to hurry up your fungal dominance to make a more fungal rich tea, that you could do it by placing a certain amount of compost in, let's see. Placing the compost in a cool, moist place, adding a couple of cups of oats to it, and leaving it for a week. And the fungi would then spread through this mix, and you could use it in your compost tea to make the compost tea more fungal dominant. So my question to Lee was, so that sounds good. What if after the thermophilic stage of the compost at your home compost pile, which is largely more bacterial, what if you took this this fungal-rich oats and compost and you sprinkled it in there or embedded it in there? Could you maybe make your home compost more fungal dominant? Well, he thought that was maybe a research problem for some of his interns or something, but he didn't have a direct answer to it. He did say that, and this is, other people have said this to me too, and especially Christine Jones. She says, you don't have to worry about adding a whole bunch of stuff like that because the things already exist. If you just make the environment conducive to growing that kind of thing, the fungi, then the fungi will proliferate and it will become more fungal dominant. So after the thermophilic stage of your compost pile, if you keep it moist and keep it a little bit, and it will be cooler, then you will have an opportunity to grow more fungi in that compost pile before you apply it.
Joyce, there was another question.
Yeah, okay, Cheryl, thank you for that. There are a couple questions about actually this, and also where—
Wait a minute, we lost you. You
We
gotta
lost
say,
you.
you have to say that again.
Okay. It says internet connection unstable. Okay, look, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So one question had to do with if organic seed would be preferred for cover crop seed. And the other question of related is what online resources are there for cover crop seed?
Well, all you have to do is type in cover crop and you're going to have all kinds of people that want to sell you cover crop seeds. It's not going to be hard to find. I forgot to say, I do have a bag here. So these are my cover crops, yay! So this is a bag that I got from, I guess am I supposed to not say where I got them?
Probably not.
Okay, I'm not telling you that I got these from True Leaf, which is a pretty affordable place to get a cover crop seed. They're really fast. Anyway, there are a lot of places that will sell you cover crop seeds, and you know, I can think of a bunch of them that and you can probably think of any place where you go and order seeds, you're going to get them. So, so this is like wheat, winter peas, triticale, collards, vetch, radish, clover, and yellow mustard. I kind of like that one. So they had a whole bunch of other selections, and any of these places will have other kinds of selections. It's not going to be hard for you to find things.
Also, a couple people—
the organic question.
Yeah, the organic question. And then
Okay.
as well, the other place for seed purchase is Northern Star Mills. You can purchase cover crop seed as well at the Guard Feed Store on Highway 32.
That's right. And you can also probably get it at some of the other places that sell seeds as well, you know.
Okay. So go ahead about the organic question.
Yeah. The one thing that you want to avoid is getting seeds that have been treated with a fungicide, because that's kind of going against what you want to do. About the organic.
You said something about it breaking down in the soil, ultimately, any of the residues that you might see in that kind of thing, but you don't want the fungicide because you don't want it to be prohibiting. Right?
Yeah, the fungicide on the seed will inhibit the fungi that you are helping build your soil. They will inhibit the growth of those. So that one is one that you would probably not go for. I don't really have an answer to the organic thing. I don't.
Do you pursue it yourself?
Huh?
Do you pursue organic yourself for seed?
I can't even remember.
Yeah.
It's not one of my primary things. I think that things are going to act on it, but I don't really know. I'm
Okay. And what about another question, Joyce? Do you have any more?
Well, there's another question that came up, and I think it goes back to your talk last week about no-till. But one question had to do with, is it necessary to actually till the cover crop into the soil to get the benefits, or how should you handle that?
Okay, that's a really good question. And the answer with the no-till is no, you don't till it into the soil, because remember, you're supposed to be growing microbes, and you don't want to be disturbing the microbes by tilling things and digging things and chopping them up. So what you do with the cover crop is you cut it off, or some of them you can just push over and leave them on the ground. And if you top it with a little bit of compost, that helps it break down. You could just leave it without topping it with compost, but if you're building soil, you probably want to add some compost before you're planting into it to offset that use of nutrients as it's breaking down. You do not need to dig it into the soil.
I see a question now myself. Should my takeaway with adobe soil is to plant a mix of cover crops, seed, including daikon?
Yeah. That's a really heavy soil. So you will want to order one of the mixes that has soil busting up properties. I ordered one of those mixes myself because I also have, I don't know about adobe. I could make an adobe shed from my soil. It's so heavy in clay. But yeah, definitely get one with that have roots, and that's daikon plus I think winter grasses. I want to give you permission, as I give myself permission, to not know everything and to just look it up when you have these questions. So you can, heavy soil, just order the one that's going to break it up and have the deepest roots and the best and also radishes are going to be good for that, and grasses are going to be good for that.
I see some notes here that people are saying thank you so much. They've enjoyed your presentations, both here online and at Patrick Ranch. And I agree that this has been very fascinating. It's one of the reasons why I didn't try to interrupt you to ask questions. I'm wondering how you'd like to wrap it up the last few minutes. Do you have any more slides to share with us, or just going to let people know that we're going to send them the information later? And if there's anything else you want to share, I can pull it up on the screen, or you can just continue talking. Is there any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for joining me and for making an opportunity for me to learn this stuff, because it really did spur me on to reading and watching more of the videos. It is very entertaining, and to go into the Chico State site. Remember, we have one of the premier places right here in our midst for the forefront of this is the Center for Regenerative Ag, which is really fairly new. I think they've only formed it for the last 3 years or something. And there's a lot of information on the site. It's a little difficult to navigate for me. I get lost in which is the place where I get to see the YouTube videos that I want. But give it some time and pull some of those up. Some of them are as short as like 1 minute on a given topic, and they'll solidify the concepts. Especially if you're not entirely sure, look at the data, look at what they're coming up with. It's really very exciting.